Hey drifters, are you ready to produce? Welcome to the first official episode of Catch Your Drift. Thank you so much for being here with me today, it means a lot. Today, for the first episode, I want to talk about something that's probably a little bit outside the box, but something that I came up against recently. And I think it's quite an interesting topic that could be really helpful for a lot of guitarists out there specifically. We're going to be talking about DI boxes today. So, recently I had a project come up where I was going to be helping a friend with recording some live guitar tracks. Now, the way I record is a little bit differently. I traditionally go in through the audio interface. I like to record all of my DI tracks clean, and then later on I go through a process called reamping. That's where you send your clean signal of your guitar that you recorded out through your audio interface into your pedal board or anything, outboard that you may be using, and then into your guitar amp. Then you mic up your amp however you like to do it, you record that. The thing that's beneficial about that is that you can get your tracks exactly how you like them. You can do any editing or any changes that you need to make, and then you can send that out as many times as you want. So what that gives you, particularly if you're working by yourself, is a lot of opportunities to explore where you like to put microphones on the amp. I like to do a lot of different things with microphones. I'm going to be talking about that in a future episode as well. There's a very traditional way that a lot of guitarists are doing these days. It works, it sounds great, it's very simple. But I also like to experiment. I like to play with room mics. I like to play with the back of the amp as well if you have a combo unit that has an open back. So there's a lot of different things you can do. If you're using a clean DI signal, sending it out through the interface, doing the reamping process, it's just way easier to move pieces of gear around, and it's really a great way to do things. Plus, it also gives you the chance to experiment with different tones. Maybe you think you're gonna like something, really dirty, but then you get into the mixing process and you realize, you know what, this could be maybe better on a crunch setting or a cleaner setting. Just go back and use that same track as many times as you need to get the sound that you're looking for. So that's how I like to do it. So this thing that I'm gonna be talking about today doesn't exactly apply to how I've done things traditionally, but it's a really good thing to know because in this instance, I had a friend ask, hey, I wanna do some recording, but I want to record the tracks live as we're going to be, doing them. So I'm going to be having the microphones on the amps, the way it would have always been done traditionally in the old days. And so when doing that, I thought to myself, okay, well, no problem. I know how to do that. We've done that before. But I also thought it would be great if I could get the DI track as well, because like I said, later on you have some changes you want to make. It's just so helpful to have that DI track. So that's what DI boxes are great for. Basically, you have something on here called a through. And what you can do in the through is you can plug that in and send that out to your amp. And then that way, the guitarist is going to hear everything as they normally would. They can play the way they normally would. I can put microphones on the amp, which is great, so we get the pure track. But then, through the output of the DI box, that goes into the interface directly. So then I also get the clean track, so that way I can go back and do any changes later that I wanted. So fantastic. The thing that came up was interesting was I decided, since I don't usually do this way myself, I thought, okay, I'm going to go in and do some checks before I go in and do this with my friend because I always like to be prepared as much as I can. I was very surprised to find out it didn't work quite the way that I thought it was going to. When I went to do it, I noticed, hey, when I've got this plugged into my amp, something doesn't quite sound right in the DI track. It sounds very dull. Usually DI tracks sound pretty bright. They sound very clean. That's an important part because if you're going to be reamping later, obviously, or even if you're going to be using amp simulators and DAWs, which is very common these days, but you want that track to be as clean as possible to send the most pristine signal into whatever you're doing. So when I was listening to this, I thought, something's not working here quite right. I hear it very dull. So I started reading, I started exploring, I started moving cables around, I started trying with different cables, thinking maybe the cable was the problem. Then I started moving, power supplies around, thinking, well, maybe I'm getting some noise from the electric or something like that. Nothing was working. So I thought, well, this is very strange. I never would have thought that this would have been a problem because that's what DI boxes are for, largely. They're for other things as well, but specifically with this, that's why it has a through, port so that we can send your signal out to your amp. So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to start reading, and I read, and I read, and I read some more, and luckily I found one spot that had just a little bit of information about it, and it was just enough to give me some clues as to what was going on. So that's what I'm going to be talking about in today's video. Now we're going to go over to the DAW, I'm going to show some tracks, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what I did. Come on, riders! Okay, fellow riders, here we are in the DAW now, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to take a look at some tracks that I recorded that I think are going to help illustrate what I was talking about earlier. So what I did here was I took a small section of our song from Drifting Riders, Flight of the Nomads, and I re-recorded the clean track part 6 times. And I did this in different ways so that way you could kind of see the differences of what I'm talking about. So basically the first time that you're going to hear it, it's just going directly into the audio interface, not using a DI box at all. I use that as a control, so that way you could kind of have an idea of, just what the cleanest example of recording it sounds like. The audio interface I use is the ID44 from Audient. It's great. It sounds really good. Then the next thing I did is I did a recording of it with the DI box, but I did not plug anything into the through. And what I noticed was that produced a very different result than when I did use the through. So we'll listen to that as well. And then I did 2 examples using the DI box, using the through without anything extra. You'll hear what that sounds like. That's where it started to get to be a bit problematic. And for the last example, I'm going to show the solution that I came up with that helps make this better. So let's go ahead and we'll do a comparison first of the first 2 takes. It's going to be the one that was done in the audio interface directly, and then it's going to be one that was done with the DI box without using the through. So that's what this sounds like. Okay, so that's what that one sounds like. It sounds very good. It's clean, it's pristine. It's basically exactly what you want out of a good DI track. Let's go ahead and listen to the next example now. This will be where I use the DI box, but I did not plug anything to the through out to the amp. Okay, same thing. So basically we have another great clean DI track. It actually sounds to me almost exactly the same as going through the Audient, so that's great. So now let's go ahead and we'll go on and listen to the next tracks. I'm going to play little chunks of both of these. Basically what we're going to hear now is going in through the DI box into the audio interface, but then using the through to go to the amp. In one instance, I actually just had it playing on standby, and then in the other instance, I had, it off standby so that way the signal was actually going out to the amp. I took a little chunk of both because strangely there was a bit of a difference here, and I think it's interesting to listen to the 2 of them. Let's hear them now. Okay, so I think now we can tell something's a little bit different with these 2 takes. I switched back and forth a few times so you could hear both. I thought it was really interesting that the standby track in particular sounded as different as it did. And by the way, just what I mean by that is that for the standby track, I literally had the amp on standby rather than on, so no sound was coming out of it in that instance. But I think that this also starts to illustrate, and give a bit of a clue as to what was going on here. Basically, just in terms of the sound of it, the track that was on standby, it had a very woolly sound to me. It didn't sound very good at all. When I did turn the amp on, I thought that it got better, but if you listen closely, especially if you're listening on studio monitors or good headphones, I think you can tell that it sounds a bit distorted. And by the way, at the end of this video, I'm going to go ahead and I'll play all the clips together, one right after the other, so that way you can hear the difference a little bit easier. You'll definitely be able to tell that the original tracks were much cleaner and much better sounding. So now I think it's important to get into what's going on here a little bit. Basically, from what I've understood is when the amp is turned on, and again, whether it's on standby or it's all the way on, just the fact that the amp has power going to it, and you're using the through from the DI box to the amp, that seems to be having an impact on the clean DI signal itself. And I thought that was interesting. I did a little research, like I said earlier, and it does seem that that can happen. Luckily for us, there is a pretty simple solution and it worked great. I'm going to play those two examples now, and then we'll get into the discussion. News. I think now after listening to that, it's clear that we were able to solve the challenge. The DIs sound great. They're clean and pristine again, just like in the original examples. We're using the DI box to go into the interface. We're also using the through to go out to the amp. As you can tell from when I switch back and forth, it sounds great whether it's on standby or if the amp is actually, putting sound out of it. And so for the big dramatic moment, what is the solution? The solution was a buffer pedal. So what I did was to put a buffer pedal in between my guitar and the DI box before going to the interface and going out to the amp. That cleaned up the signal. It seemed to give it just enough of that top end that we were seeming to lose in the other examples. It helped us not hit any kind of distortions on the way in. And, again, it's a very kind of easy solution. Probably a lot of people out there who have pedals already, it's at least a good chance that one of your pedals has a buffer in it. If you're not sure, you can check online, of course, or you can leave a comment in the section. I can, of course, try to help you as well. So I think that in the end, we found a pretty good solution to this challenge. Sounds great. You can record your guitar tracks live in the room the traditional way. You can also capture your DI box on the way in for any additional reamping later, or sometimes it's just nice to have the DI track for helping with editing as well. So to finish this video, I'm going to play all the tracks that I played earlier throughout this video, and I'm going to just jump through between each of them so that way you can hear a bit of the difference. And I think it will really stand out how much better it is to either go directly into your audio interface, or if you're going to be recording live in the room, use the DI box but put a buffer pedal before it, and you'll be much happier with the sound you're going to get. So thanks so much to everybody for watching. This was the first official episode of Catch Your Drift. It was very exciting to do it, and there will be many more coming in the future as well. Also, if you found this video helpful, it would really help us if you would subscribe to the channel and like and comment, share, all that good stuff. Okay, so let's go ahead and listen to the tracks now. Thanks again, fellow riders.
Any place, just give me